Today on the RotoWire Dynasty podcast, I want to talk about taxi squad stashes. And this is a topic that internally, Scott, that I got a lot of pushback on. They're like, who even knows about this? I said, if you're watching a Dynasty podcast, right, in the May timeframe, I don't care if this isn't like the top 12 sleepers. Like, this is actionable advice. And of course, I'm here with Scott Connor from Destination Devy and the very popular Trades in 5 YouTube show, which I've become addicted to. Scott, let's just start with some of the basics here. If you explain it to like you were explaining to my grandmother, what's a taxi squad for those who aren't familiar in the Dynasty world?
Yeah, good question. So a taxi squad, I'll just say this. A taxi squad has its purpose, but I think you need to have the right kind of league for a taxi squad to begin with. I'm in some leagues where there are taxi squads, and you go, why is there a taxi squad? Because there's 42-man rosters already, and it's kind of like the taxi squad. I think people like to have it to say, oh, they're stashing someone down there. They don't have to count on their actual roster. Effectively, it's just another place to keep players that maybe you feel like, hey, I'm developing them a little bit because they're down in this little area that says TX or taxi or, whatever it's called in your platform. But really, it's just a place where you can put assets. They don't count towards your roster space. They don't count towards your potential points if you like that. That's another thing that the taxi squad has helped me over the years. If you have a potential points league, for people that don't know that, a lot of leagues do draft order based on the potential points. So it's how many points you would have scored, which is I guess you would say, a better measure of whether your team was good or not. But you can hide players on the taxi squad because they're exempt. They don't count. So I've seen it. I've seen the Jamar Chases and the Breece Halls on the taxi squad because you know what? I want to get next year's 101, and those guys are going to score too many points. But I had last year's 101 and the year before's 101, and I don't want them to count. So people put them on the taxi squad. But other than that, it's extra roster spots. If I do a roster review for Trades in 5 and there's a taxi squad, I just add it to the total roster spots. Effectively, unless it's rookies only, a lot of taxi squads are like second and first year players. They're really just extra roster spots. The way fantasy football is now, you don't hold players for more than 2 years. If you don't know what they are in 2 years, you're probably in the clouds in terms of what they are because they're nothing.
Yeah, and that'll lead into our conversation later about tight ends too, because you always hear tight ends are a year 3 breakout. So, and we're going to talk about what types of players belong on a taxi squad and which ones, as you said it so eloquently on a video, which ones are basically lighting those picks on fire. What I think, though, that the purpose of a taxi squad is that if you have a 40-man roster, taxi squad, probably not necessary, but anywhere in the 25 to 30-ish range, I think there is a case for it because it makes those 3rd, 4th, and 5th round rookie picks worth something. Because if you have a 20, like FFPC, you have to cut down to 16, those 3rd and 4th round picks, they're more just throwing chips. I mean, it's so rare only one person in your league is going to hit on Elijah Mitchell. Most of them are going to be, some wide receiver taken on day 3 that you're basically going to discard.
Yeah, I mean, I think the format is huge. That's why I said at the beginning, if your league, if it makes sense to have a taxi squad, I've started to play a lot more best ball Dynasty. Taxi squads in best ball are players you can put on your taxi, but running backs that are 3rd or 4th on the depth chart, tight ends that are developmental players. You probably wouldn't want to hold those in a best ball league because in best ball, you're trying to find as many players that can play weekly. That 4th running back or that 3rd string tight end that you're trying to develop probably wouldn't be a good best ball play unless there's a taxi where it's not counting towards your active roster spots and you can intentionally park some players there to say, okay, I don't really need these players, but I want to have them there for a reason. And then the other thing is I'm in some leagues where you can actually poach people's taxi squad players where like, hey, there's a preconceived price on all the players based on where they were drafted or where their ADP was, whatever you set it up to be. It's usually a little cost prohibitive, but hey, if you have a guy on your taxi and you took him in the 4th round and I'm willing to pay 2/3 or a second or something, I can take him off your taxi. Now you can reclaim him just like the real NFL. Wow. The biggest thing is the NFL has to put him on their 53-man roster. They probably had him on the practice squad for a reason. They didn't want to count a roster spot. So it's the same thing. So there's a bunch of ways you can incorporate it. But I think what you're saying is correct. If you have a league where every roster spot is precious, it's a way where you can feel like you're developing some players without feeling like, man, if this 6th round pick doesn't perform right away, I don't have a reason to roster him anymore.
Right. And the RotoWire Dynasty podcast, as always, is brought to you by Circa Las Vegas. We're going to talk about them and the amazing fantasy football hosting that they're going to be doing a little bit later on the show. And I'm here with Scott Connor, and we're talking about Taxi Squad stashes. We're going to give you a few player names a little bit later on, but I want to rewind this a little bit because this is rookie draft season. This is Dynasty startup season. And, I've had this discussion, and I'm not even sure there's a right answer. I'm just curious about structurally. Let's just talk about a super flex league, yes, or a small premium on tight ends. What do you believe is the correct way or the most optimal way to draft a roster in a startup scenario where all the players are available for you? We're talking about a snake draft. How do you do it?
So quick plug to, I did release a Destination Devy episode back in the beginning of, actually, I think at end of February. And it was literally titled My Ideal Way to Do a Startup.
I'll link that once I post this in the video description. So if you're listening on the audio podcast or on the replay, it's already in the video description for you to check it out.
Perfect. Yeah. And that just kind of goes through like, if I was doing a startup, now this was back in February, and part of the strategy was in January or February when a lot of people like to do startups because the season just ended. Yeah, don't you think that's the best time to do them? Because everyone is flying blind. There's so much we don't know. There's so much that's going to change. And part of the reason I like to do it then is because I think if you have the right structure and the right approach, that's the edge. The edge is not picking the right players because 80% of the situations and players change by the time we go from January to opening day of the next season. So it's like everyone else goes into it and goes, man, I'm going to just kind of chase the players that I like, the players I think are going to get better, the players that have situations that are good in February, and then they're completely blown up by the time you get to July. I go into it going, I'm just chasing a structure. Forget about who the players are. And because of the way the current player pool is set up right now in Dynasty, once you get to like a certain point where the really, really elite players are gone and all the top quarterbacks are gone, all the other running backs and receivers, and even a lot of the QB2s and low-end, high-end QB3s, they're all in just one big jumbled mix.
Right.
Nobody really wants to pay a premium for them. But you also know by the time you get to the season, you have to have enough of them to compete. So I'm looking at that range as like, if I'm doing a startup, especially before free agency, before the NFL draft, it's a little different now because there's less variance that's going to take place between now and the start of the season. But it's like, I want to lock in my elite quarterbacks. I want to lock in the positional advantages based on the format. So if I can squeeze out getting an elite tight end, I'll do that. Maybe I'll shoot for an anchor running back, but that's pretty much it. I'm willing to trade out of I'll give you my 3rd round pick and I'll take a shot on a 6th round pick.
Right.
Because really, if we're both picking a receiver, there's a shot I have the better guy just based on variance. And so what I like to do is I like to say, okay, we're doing a snake draft. I try to trade up and get another top 10 startup pick. So I can grab 2 elite quarterbacks, top 9, depending on whatever your tiers are. Forget, however you tier. Lock in those 2 quarterbacks. I'm willing to pay 2nd, 3rd, 5th round startup pick to trade up, to give me that first. I'm okay getting out of that like 2nd, 3rd, 4th round. But I have to get picks back. There's 2 rules I say in a startup. Don't trade more picks than you're getting back. And don't trade your future picks unless it's 1-for-1 for a startup pick.
So I just want to make sure I understand what you just said. So if you're basically don't get an extra 1 and you're giving up your 3rd, 5th, and 8th, right? Like you want to, I mean, that would be an exchange.
Correct.
You want, even if they're later picks, you want more startup picks back, especially in these leagues that are starting 3 receivers, 3 flex, and you just need depth.
Exactly. Let's say it's a league we're doing 11 starters. I'm actually comfortable going back to the 10th, 11th, 12th, even 13th round. Because once you get into that range, you're not really losing much against the person that's picking in the 8th round, 9th round. They get to pick their preference. You probably get a player in the same tier. So let's say I give you a 2nd, a 3rd, and a 5th round startup pick. I get back your 1st. Let's say you give me the 106. Perfect. I'm sitting on getting Trevor Lawrence or Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow, and I already drew the 104. So I'm getting 2 of those guys. That's awesome. That's my start. But I don't want to just give you that 2, 3, and 5 for your 1. Give me back your 8th and your 11th, or your 9th and your 10th, or something. You got to get it to where it's an even match. So that's the first step. That's the first thing I try to do. And it depends on your league. I've been in leagues where 10 other people are trying to do that. You can't do it.
So then what do you do? That's what I'm saying. Because you remember the year that everyone was trying to do zero running back after Siegel won the whole damn thing? And then I was taking like Eric Decker in round 2 when he was a 6th-round pick because I needed 3 receivers. So if you do notice everyone's doing it, is there a counter to that?
I think if there's a counter to it, it's essentially, you know what the board's going to look like. It's going to go QB, 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 QB. I mean, it's just going to be like 9 straight QBs to start the startup. No one's going to be willing to trade those. You have to shift your roster construction to that point. To my next plan of action, even if I don't get that done, is those dead zone ranges, right? The 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round. Can I get what's called a leverage trade in one of those ranges? So let's say I do make the trade, just for this example. I give up my 2nd, my 3rd, and my 5th round startup pick. You give me back your 1st, your 9th, and your 10th. So now I have an extra 9th and a 10th. I have those stashed away, but I still have that 4th rounder. Unless I can get a elite running back or tight end there where I can say that's an anchor for that position, most likely in the 4th round of the startup, I'm not getting that. So what I'm trying to do next is how can I double insure myself for if I miss out on a lot of these skill players, because my quarterbacks are locked down. I'm going to have to be picking kind of at the back end of the preferred skill player ranges because I've traded out of the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 5th. I immediately go and take my 4th round pick. I offer it to Alan because Alan really needs to draft J.K. Dobbins. He needs him, right?
Right. That's my guy.
Give me back your 24 first rounder and your 8th round startup pick. Can I get a deal like that? And now I have an extra 1st rounder banked. Because I know next year, guess what? I'm probably going to need to fill a couple receivers and or running backs because I didn't hit on like the perfect players this early in the startup. So I want to leave the rookie draft or the startup draft with at least 2 future firsts. That's it. If I can get the 2 elite quarterbacks and I can build up 2 extra 1st round picks, I feel like there's very little pressure for me to win year 1, but I've had teams that win year 1 because it go, wow, man, the receiver you took in round 7, 8, and 9 were just as good as the ones Alan took in round 3, 4, and 5.
Right.
How did that happen?
Jerry Jeudy versus Brandon Ayuk, in a startup the year Jerry Jeudy, but they were both rookies,
Exactly. Yeah. So like when you're picking receivers, especially, like it's a coin flip. So I'm willing to take the gamble there. But the biggest thing I have is I don't have to worry about quarterback. There's no worse feeling than when you have a middling team and you're stuck at the 106 in the rookie draft and you desperately want to try to get Bryce Young or Anthony Richardson, and the person in that slot is probably like, yeah, you're going to have to pay a serious premium to do it. And then you give up all this equity that you kind of stored in the startup just to get a rookie quarterback where you're already taking a ton of risk. So I don't want to do that. But I think the biggest thing is, Alan, if I go to year 2 and year 3 of a league, if all I need to do is find receivers and running backs, that's easy. They exist in every draft. Right. They're always available. Now, you may not want to pay the price, but I can always go buy a guy like DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Brandon Ayuk. Those guys are available for a future first, some form or fashion of that type of player. Always available. Running backs, I can always draft or trade for running backs. So it's like, if all I have is picks and I just need to get skill players, by time year 2 or 3 comes around, as long as my quarterbacks don't suffer like a Watson situation or a career-ending injury, I'm going to be in really good shape, and I may have my cake and eat it too because I can potentially win in year 1, just depending on how the variance goes my way or against me.
Yeah, no, this is very validating for me because, I did this a couple of years ago, the strategy, and I had it somehow at the time. I had Pat Mahomes and Josh Allen in a particular league. So, my team kind of flamed out, but I was still like almost made the playoffs. Like that was my absolute floor.
Do you still have that team?
Still have the team.
And doesn't that team feel like there's very little pressure for you to have to do much except for just acquire like skill player talent whenever it comes available?
I'm about to validate what you just said. I had pick 1. I ended up at pick 110 in the rookie draft, and somebody had a hard on for Jordan Addison who fell, and I got like two receivers out of it. I got like DJ Moore and like a Brandon Ayuk type right into my starting lineup. Now we're talking. Now I'm a playoff team automatically where Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers. I mean, we like them, but who knows, right? I mean, and again, sexy name, DJ Moore and Brandon Ayuk, those aren't sexy names, but in a start 11, start 12, they're in your lineup every week. And what's the worst thing about wide receivers that aren't elite guys at the top is that if they have 2 bad weeks, Scott, we just never know whether to start him. If Brandon Ayuk in a normal start 3 with 1 flex comes out and has 3 for 30, 2 for 28, we're putting him on our bench, and he's probably going to go off on our bench there. But when the depth is bigger in these dynasty startup leagues, it's like every week, don't worry, you'll get your points at the end of the year. And, that's really the balance between running backs and wide receivers. So that really is the next question I have for you is, what do you think in the startup draft is the biggest mistake, the most common mistake that even experienced dynasty players continue to make?
I think it goes back to what I said, that there is not a higher negative EV move than when you just give away your first just to make a pick preference on a player.
First rookie or first startup?
No, your first round rookie pick in a future year just to move up. Now, if you get the pick straight up, if you're in the 5th round of the startup and somebody happens to go, hey, I'll trade this pick for a future first, and it's a player where you go, all right, I could probably squint and say it's worth paying a future first for this player in a dynasty league, I can be okay with doing that. Now, I would still even say if you're doing that in February or March, be careful, because why are you may love Brandon Ayuk. We've talked about him a couple times already in the show. You may love him. You may think, you know what, this is a guy that could be really good with Brock Purdy because he was last year, and could be even better if he somehow finds a new situation, if the Niners don't keep him. Like, his best game could be ahead of him, right? He's worth maybe buying for a first-round pick. But it also feels like if you're spending your first on that, doesn't it feel like you might be leaving a little opportunity cost on the table by using that in February to buy a wide receiver 3 that maybe could be a wide receiver 2 when, man, have you ever been in a league and it's middle of the season and you go, damn, this person's willing to trade this Derrick Henry that's scoring 23 points per game. All he wants is a first. Yep. And I don't have one, but the guy that has multiples can go, hey, here you go. I got an extra one. So it feels like that. It's a good move. I don't love it though, because you've given away your one chip that everybody gets every year at the worst time, the time when we don't know anything, the time when they could draft another receiver, he could get hurt. All these things could happen. So that's bad. But the worst thing is I need to go get Drake London. So I'm going to give you Brandon Ayuk and a first. Right. So I can draft Drake London in the startup. And that's the anti-leverage trade. You're going to lose those trades 8 out of 10 times. Wow. And those are the ones I want to be on the other side of. So I think that's the worst move.
Yeah, you talked about what we often talk about the dynasty calendar over on the RotoWire YouTube page and the in our site and everything. And people always ask, one of the most common questions, like last year, right, heading into the season, was, what should I get for Dalvin Cook? I said, don't trade him until he has that 100-yard and 2-touchdown game in week 6. And when you look at the 27-year-old running backs, it's the same thing. Wait to Derrick Henry is going to be a good example this year. Don't trade Derrick Henry now if you have him. Wait until, if you're a bad team, unless it's a mega deal, wait till he has 2 100-yard games in a row with multiple touchdowns. You'll get your 2 first. Whatever it is, you'll get that young player plus. So I think that's also an underrated part of dynasty strategy, is when to sell the player, when to sell the veterans, when the rookie picks are worth the most. Injury discounts in startups. I mean, I have adopted a philosophy of fading injury optimism is always going to make you money in fantasy football. I'm going to be wrong. I faded Joe Burrow coming off the injury. Got it wrong. How about Javonte Williams? That seems to be one of the questions that people are asking now. Like, oh, my God, in redraft, I see Javonte going in best balls. Obviously, I would never even touch him with all the bad news. But are you willing to go in on players like that have serious injury questions, even though they're young players, when they come at a couple round discount in startups?
So Javonte specifically, It's funny you say he's young, because you look at a running back and you go, he's entering year 3, coming off a shredded knee. To me, that's not a young running back. Like, it's from an age perspective, but more importantly, from like a dynasty track perspective.
A mileage.
a mileage perspective. Yeah. And here's the thing. Unfortunately for Javonte Williams, and I said this about J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers, and we'll see about Breece Hall, but when these guys get hurt, either in their rookie year or Akers, Dobbins, Javonte, right at the beginning or right before their second year, that is almost the death knell for their dynasty value. They may still outperform that, but that like year 2 and year 3, when you've shown you've had a good rookie year and you had pedigree at running back, that is the magic window for running backs. Once they get to year 4, year 5, starting to talk second contracts, too much mileage, all that kind of stuff, we already know the decline in the dynasty value is going to be there. And now it's more of, can they just outperform their value for longer, which is why you'd want to buy him. But there's no buying him for an investment. So the injury for Javonte came at the worst time. Then it happened to be an even more serious injury with another guy that got injured at the same time, a.k.a. Dobbins, that had to have a second surgery, basically miss half the season. So I'm just not interested in that type of player, because the other thing is, if you look back at Javonte's first, what do we say, a year and half a season, 3 games, something like that. I think he got hurt in the second or third game last year. He really hasn't even been that good. He's been pretty inefficient. So I feel like I'm buying a plotter, a dead zone running back, and that's if he gets back and healthy. Right. And I don't know if there's ever going to be like a resale value where I can go, okay, I get him at 5th round startup price or 6th round startup price, and then I can resell him for more, because he's a running back. Right. And a lot of people just, unless you are an elite running back, smart dynasty players are going, man, do you really want to give your first for Javonte Williams when you can fill in with multiple Chuba Hubbards and Rashad Pennies and probably get close to the same production if you have the right roster construction and enough roster spots to house that many players? So just, he wouldn't be a guy I would buy unless I saw a track where I could resell for more, but I don't even see that with him. So no, I'm with you. I'm fading the injury discounts. Let somebody else bet on that outcome and, well, play the numbers.
Yeah. It's you hear, this is an argument I have internally at RotoWire all the time that, it's 10 months till they return to play. I said, it's a year and a half before they're back to normal. And back to normal, there's a new normal. Breece Hall, there's probably a chance he's only 90%, 85% if he has a full recovery. And by the way, that's great, but it's not worth second round redraft. And certainly in Dynasty, I mean, I've seen him as ranked as high as the RB2 now. I mean, we're in Bijan's world, and let's just remember that. But I guess for that's the next question then is where would you rank Breece Hall? And that doesn't mean that you would necessarily draft him in the second round, but where do you rank him among Dynasty running backs? And is Bijan Robinson your RB1 for Dynasty?
Yeah, Bijan's RB1. After that, you're probably like, okay, I have to rank somebody at RB2. So it's probably either Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, or Jonathan Taylor. And then it's how much tolerance do you have for Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Austin Eckler, the difference makers, if you're a baseball fan, the wins above replacement or the warp difference makers. Like, you're willing to take on a season of those guys if you can get 22 points per game from Christian McCaffrey. Like, that's worth probably more than most dynasty running backs. That's worth more than paying a first for Kenneth Walker or J.K. Dobbins, because you kind of know those guys are what they are. I don't know if they have anything close to that ceiling. So
you're going to go 2 on Hall? He's going to be your second round running back?
I'm going to go 2 on Hall, but the Jets have kind of said, like, it's funny when the rumors about Ezekiel Elliott wanting to go to the Jets. You remember that back in free agency when he got cut. Breece Hall tweeted to Michael Carter, and he said, there's no room in this backfield for Zeke, right? So he specifically tagged Michael Carter, like that's the running back 2 on the team. They still have Zonovan Knight. They had to draft Izzy Abanikanda. So I think the Jets are kind of setting up like, we don't want to load Breece Hall up in year 2. We probably aren't going to, based on, even if he comes back from his injury, do you really want to load him up exactly how he was last year when Michael Carter was still getting like 11, 10 touches a game when Breece Hall was at his peak? So I think relative to the player pool, whoever the RB2 is weaker than it has ever been compared to the high-end receivers and quarterbacks. So, yes, someone by default has to be RB2, but if you have Breece Hall in a league, can you go get A.J. Brown, Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb? The person just is like, man, I'll find cheaper running backs. I'll find a better way to fill my running back stable than giving up elite quarterbacks or elite receivers to get Breece Hall. So just relative to the player pool, he's way further down than he used to be.
If you're in a existing league, and most people in your league, they look at all the different rankings around the industry, they'll see Breece Hall ranked as the number 2 running back. I think Breece Hall is a good opportunity in a superflex league to go get to give your first round pick and get Trevor Lawrence, and then or give Matthew Stafford and Breece Hall and get Justin Herbert or something like that, where you take your 20th quarterback, add him to Breece Hall, get an elite quarterback. That's another way that I've been doing. And I think last year the exact trade I made was Hall and a first for Lamar Jackson when he was injured for multiple weeks. And it didn't feel great at the time. It feels pretty good now. And just before we continue on, Scott, I want to let everybody know the ultimate fantasy football draft can take place in Las Vegas at Circa Resort and Casino. And they want to bring your whole league to Vegas with the ultimate draft. Bring your whole 12-person league for a 2-night stay at Circa Resort. And you'll get a cabana up at the Stadium Swim. They'll limo you from the airport, a welcome party at the Legacy Club, a booth at the world's largest sports book, a prize package of over $8,000. There's no better place to draft than Circa 21 and up. Go to circalasvegas.com for more information. I mean, I have just told everyone that I'm in leagues with, Scott, just enter this contest. I can't enter it, but I can be in a league that enters it. I mean, you're going to be in Vegas. They're going to give you the treatment, have your draft there. So if anyone's listening to this, go to Circa Las Vegas, man. Why not? Just put your league name in there, and it's a random drawing. You don't have to buy anything. And imagine getting the cabana treatment, the bottle service, the whole deal, man. So it's a must do.
Yeah, I'm just picturing my my home league and this selling them on actually going to Vegas when I can't even get them to go out and watch games on Sundays because they all have kids, and been in a league for, I'm sure you're in a couple of those leagues where you've been in them forever, and it's like it's still a 10-team, 1 QB league with 8 starters and a kicker and a defense. And I'm just like, can we evolve? And it's just like radio silence all year until we get a week before the draft and everybody's scrambling. But I can just picture that group going, hey, yeah, this year we're drafted in Vegas. There's going to be a party. And I'm just picturing that in my head as you're reading the ad.
Not happy, right? Well, listen, you're visualizing it. It's a great idea because we went for RotoWire. We went to Vegas last year and we did a draft there at the. It's wild, man. People are getting crazy. It's they do treat you really well there. So check it out, man. And I like that you're having visualization of these people that you could barely get them to do anything. All of a sudden, everyone trekking out there. That's great. All right, I'm here with Scott Connor, and we're talking about we were talking about dynasty strategy, but I promised everyone, especially with the titling of this, we're going to talk about some stashes taxi squad stashes before we get back into some strategy talk. So. I think it's a really valuable piece of advice, your philosophy on what happens when you get into the 3rd round. And I love I'm going to quote you here because I thought this, you hear about some wide receiver on a podcast, you get really excited to draft this guy, and basically now you've clogged up your roster. So let's start with just a strategy. Everyone loves the top 15, 16 players. So once you get into the 3rd round of these rookie drafts, what's the right way to draft? Because sometimes I see a receiver I like better than a running back, but after listening to what you said, I'm not so sure which direction I can go here.
Well, I think the first thing is before you just make picks based on the ADP, or because we are all in a lot of leagues, and sometimes you're on the clock in multiples and you're trying to work trades and try to do other stuff at the same time. And we get into just pick. You got people in the chats going, hey, you're on the clock, Alan, pick,
OTC.
OTC. And so you get it. And I've done it. Last week I was in 21 drafts at one time, and I'm trying to track all of them. And it's like, sometimes you do just end up kind of picking to pick. I don't have the energy at 11 a.m. in the morning when I'm multitasking to go work 3 trades in the group me or the Slack chat while I'm trying to, work and do my other stuff at the same time. So pick with purpose. I think that's the first thing is before you make this pick, what is the out for the player? And I'll give 2 examples of that. What's your roster construction look like? Most of my teams, if you listen to my content, are set up to embrace the variance at running back. Jordan McNamara, if you've listened to him, he goes even more extreme to me.
He's been on this podcast many times. So he's a favorite of the RotoWire audience.
Yeah, he's good. And we don't see eye to eye on everything. And he goes even more to the extreme with me. But what he talks about with warp and with flex viability, if you're just talking like PPR leagues, the most dominant way to win the flexes is with receivers within a certain threshold. So like we were talking about earlier, if you're in a start 11 or start 12 and you can throw in the wide receiver 4s and 5s, and randomly you'll get a 22-point week out of like Josh Palmer. He wouldn't have been in your lineup in a start 8, start 9. If anything, he kills you in a start 9 because you see the 22 points and then you play him the next week and he scores 5 and you're pissed off because you're going, well, I can't predict when he's going to hit. And that's most receivers outside of the top 10 or so. So I think it's the pick with purpose, know your format, have your roster construction set up a year or two in advance to take advantage of this. Most of my teams are. So when I'm getting to the 3rd and 4th rounds, my strategy is more when I say pick with purpose. If I'm going to draft, and I'm as guilty as everybody of buying a little buzz on some players every once in a while. I preach, hey, roster clogger receivers, don't draft receivers outside the top 40. But there's been a couple exceptions. I have a couple shares of Kayshon Boutte. I have a share of Tank Dell. But when I clicked pick on Kayshon Boutte, the theory was, okay, he's sitting there at the 402 in the rookie draft. It wasn't because I am forecasting Kayshon Boutte to be successful or ever be within that usable wide receiver threshold. There's probably somebody that will give me at least a 1/3 or 2/3 if there's ever a window to sell him. So that's the pick with purpose, right? I'm drafting a roster clogger receiver or a developmental tight end with a purpose. Other than that, your pick should be, all right, what can I do with this pick now? Does it fit my roster construction? Which is why I would take a bunch of running backs. I don't care if they're 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. A guy like Dwayne McBride or Chris Rodriguez has a better shot of being in my lineup in a start 10 than Charlie Jones or A.T. Perry. I mean, just realistically, both of them are way outside of startable range. Right. But if I could ever see a path where one time during this year, I go, you know what? Chris Rodriguez is going to start this week and he might get 18 carries. I could probably be starting him in a start 10. So I think it's that or picking with the point of trading. And then the most underrated thing that I've found this year is you don't have to make a pick. And don't be so arrogant to think that you have to get a massive haul for that pick on the clock. If I'm at the 212, 211 in a rookie draft, even the 208, 209, and I don't want to pick because the format doesn't warrant me making a pick, or more importantly, in the 3rd round, and I don't want to pick, trade that 309 for a future 3rd. If you know your league is one of those leagues where, and I'm in some really active leagues where every week people are going, oh man, this backup quarterback or this backup running back on the block for a 3rd, get him off my roster, give me some draft capital instead. That 3rd's probably better used during the season to say, can I throw that 3rd into a deal, trade an injured player and a 3rd for a player that's playing? Something like that where I can actually buy points in the season versus picking between 7 running backs that went round 6 and later and hoping I know which one is going to ascend the depth chart and give me a spot start or 2. And we never used to be like that. It used to be, Alan, if I'm trading you at 212, you need to give me 2 seconds.
Right.
Because I have to wait a year to make the pick. And really, I don't have to wait a year. The whole reason to have that pick is it's actually more valuable to have the future pick. And a lot of times people know that. Smart leagues will look at the board and go, I'm not giving you a future second for that 210. I don't want to pick. Well, you don't want to pick. I don't want to pick. I'd rather have my pick during the season. So I think it's understanding the purpose of your pick and realize that when you're picking in the 3rd and 4th rounds, I mean, what are the hit rates on the players? 5, 10%?
You're lucky if you get a 2-week window. I mean, that's what it is. When you draft a couple years ago, you're taking Khalil Herbert in the 5th round of your rookie draft. I always said, if I could use this guy for 2 weeks, that is a massive win. If I could use him for 1 week during the season, it was worth the pick, right? Because that one win is the difference between how many times between you making the playoffs as the 6th spot or just basically being in the draft lottery, right? So that's what I think you're looking for. And you talked about Chris Rodriguez is that guy this year.
I mean, and think about this. When you're in really deep leagues, 13, 14 starters, it's different. But how many leagues were 10, 11 starters? Can you remember a receiver that was a 5th or 6th round pick that you went, oh man, there was that 2-week window when I just knew he was going to smash?
I mean, it's name
rare.
One? I don't know if I can name one. I'm trying to think. Was there one?
Well, you could probably go back and find a couple and say, okay.
Top of head. Is there one? Right.
Honestly, not really. The only one I can think of is Hunter Renfrow, who was a 5th round pick. But even then, and here's the funny thing, even if, and that's why, when we did that Sonic Truth show where we did the mock draft, I kept saying, why are we drafting these guys that, even the panel would be like, yeah, this guy might get third or fourth round draft capital. He's a receiver. Why are you drafting him if he gets fourth round draft capital? The funny thing about that is if you do hit, because you would agree, there's some intriguing receivers that went in late round 2, round 3 this year. Jalen Hyatt, Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed, Marvin Mims, Josh Downs. I want to have exposure to those guys. But here's the funny thing. If Josh Downs goes out and posts 70 catches as a rookie, we're going to be like, dude, he was a hit. He moves into like that startable threshold the next year because he had such a strong rookie year. But you're also going to be able to buy into him at a cheaper price than you will if Jordan Addison has the same season because he was a third round pick and he doesn't have that same pedigree. So I'm not even really afraid to pass on the Marvin Mims or the Rashee Rices or the Jaden Reeds. And I acknowledge probably one or two of those guys is going to get into the top 30, top 36 receiver range at some point. I don't know who it is, but I also know that because they didn't get the capital, they're going to be attainable. If Quentin Johnston or Jordan Addison goes out and has 80 for 1,000, 2 firsts.
Untouchable. Top 3 round startup pick. And so are you suggesting to people to take the Tank Bigsbys of the world, those type of players, over those second round wide receivers?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, especially the way that I'm playing, but even if not, I think that you have to make a list. Now, I wouldn't take Chris Rodriguez or Dwayne McBride or Evan Hall over the second and third round receivers. But when you're talking Roshan Johnson, Tank Bigsby, Devon Achane, Kendre Miller, even Tyjae Spears, from an equity standpoint, forget about long-term value because I don't think we draft any running backs in that range for more than a 2 to 3 year window max. So I don't care about the Spears injury, but it's kind of like those feel like quicker equity in terms of in my lineup, but it also feels like I'm getting a little bit more potential long-term use out of my pick, which is weird because people would say receivers last longer.
The elite ones,
but
the elite young
here's
ones.
The thing. Good receivers last longer.
Yeah, exactly.
Average receivers immediately clog your team to where you go. I mean, I was looking at a roster the other day. It's a pretty well-known analyst in the Dynasty space. I won't say who it is, but I looked at his roster and it's 30-man rosters. He has 18 receivers on his roster, and it is just littered with second, third, and 4-year receivers that are in the Josh Downs, Marvin Mims range. I mean, we're holding Laviska Shenault and Rondale Moore and Sky Moore. I mean, they're Wan'Dale Robinson. They're just collected. And I'm going like, what are you going to do with all these guys? Because the person's not actively trying to like flip them for second round picks or running backs. They're just sitting there, and I'm going like, what is the out if you have those guys on your team? What are you hoping for? You're just hoping they get to like usability, but what are they costing you in time just sitting on your team when you probably could have been cycling like the Jordan McNamara approach? He'll cycle through 20, 30 running backs in a season, and it's like those are guys you can flex in the moment during a week when you know they're going to get touches. You're never going to know on most of those receivers. So it's really a hierarchy or a high arcing strategy of how you're building your team, which affects these rookie picks. It affects how you would approach the second, third, fourth round of a draft.
Yeah, we had a question in the chat that we already answered. Someone asked about, is it Bush League to put elite rookies on taxi squad? Scott already answered that. He said, no, that's smart dynasty play. Do you think, like, if you're a bad team and you want to tank, putting Bijan on your taxi squad is fair game? I believe it is.
If it doesn't say in the bylaws that I can't do it, then
but how would you even construct that sentence? Like,
it would have to say something about how if a player has scored X amount of points or has a certain, I mean, you'd have to have a criteria, right? You couldn't really police, okay, Alan, you can't put Bijan on there, but I'm allowed to put Rashee Rice on the taxi. Yeah, it's either all or nothing. So I think that's why you don't have a taxi if you don't want people to exploit it, pretty much.
We have a rule in our leagues that to avoid tanking, this is what works. Some people hate this, but in the leagues that I commission, the bottom 6 teams just go into a complete lottery, not a weighted lottery, Scott. We just do 1 through 6 because the team that's the worst one and the team that's team 5 or 6, they're not that different, And if they are, I mean, that's usually by their own doing. So, I would say just a complete lottery. Sometimes regression will give you the 1-1. Sometimes it'll give you the 1-6, and some people hate it, but that's just how we do it to make it. And we also incentivize weekly winning with a $25 prize, or 25, whatever you're, depending on what your pool size is, to incentivize winning each week. So even if you're out of it, you know that tanking doesn't get you the 1-1, but you can somehow variance-wise get the $25 each week. So
it's either that, or you can also do, I have quite a few leagues where you actually play for your draft picks. So there's a consolation tournament, and it's literally like a bracket. The worst 2 teams get a bye, so they should, in theory, they don't get pick outside the top 4. But, you got to plan to win those matchups to get the 101, 102, and that correlates nicely with not having a trade deadline, because it gives everybody a reason to play for something all the way through the season. So I like both of those to not make it so if you just purposely suck, you get the 101.
Right. Let's talk about some more taxi squad stashes. You mentioned the Washington football team, or what do they call it? The Commanders, Chris Rodriguez. How about Eric Gray on the Giants, Deuce Vaughn? Any interest in stashing those guys? I mean, super late round picks. What was great? Like a 5th, and Deuce Vaughn a 6th or a 7th, something like that. So if you're faced with one of those guys versus Boutte, who you do value as a wide receiver, I guess juxtapose those first, and then just talk about those 2 running backs as stashes if you're not faced with that decision.
Yeah, I really like the Eric Gray, Chris Rodriguez, Evan Hall range of running backs.
Hull's going earlier, though. Hull's going almost a full round earlier now.
He's been pushed up. There's a few others like that went in the 7th, like I mentioned Dwayne McBride earlier. Lou Nichols is another one. And here, I don't even really care about whether you like the player or not. It's more of, I want to see how the depth chart plays out. Any running back that's drafted, we're starting to see this kind of erosion of draft capital for running backs, where you've probably heard it before. Like the round 3 and round 4 now is like the new round 2 and round 3 from before. So it's like a 5th round pick in the NFL is a pretty significant investment for a running back compared to what it was like 5 years ago. So it's like any running back that got draft capital, I want to add over most of those receivers, unless the caveat being I get a Boutte or a Tank Dell or somebody where I go, there's a window where I can sell them, or I can sell them for multiple running back bodies, which is another strategy. And I think that's another thing that's been lost on some of these picks is you don't have to draft Evan Hall. I made a trade the other day where I ended up getting back Pierre Strong and Tyrion Davis-Price instead of drafting Dwayne McBride. Now, you might go, I'd prefer Dwayne McBride because neither of those guys did anything last year, but reality, they're all in the same spot, right? They're all like the 3rd running back or 4th running back on their team. They have to win a spot. They're the same thing. So give me 2 shots instead of 1. It's essentially operating under the same philosophy.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if Michael Wilson, the wide receiver on the Arizona Cardinals, is he in that, hey, I'll take a shot on him round 4 range with Dell and Boutte, or is he just another one of these light him on fire probabilities?
Is Cody in my league? If Cody's in my league, or no, to be honest with you, I won't draft him unless there's a path in my league where I go, you know what, I can probably get 2/3 for this player, and I make the pick at the 308 or something like that. I can get 2/3 down the road. Like, yeah, that's the only time I'm really taking the receivers. And same for some of the running backs. Like, I've ended up taking some Sean Tucker, even though he's a UDFA. People like him.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason he's getting drafted over guys that got actual draft capital, and it's because he's a name. So, I mean, you do have to kind of consider when you get to these late picks, the power of the resell because of the name is actually higher than what the potential benefit is of the player themselves. So if you get to the end of the draft and you're like, I don't know who to pick, what player does the most people in your league know about? That's the guy to draft.
Yeah. So you come from the Devy space, right? I mean, that's you're firmly in those trenches right there. So is that why Zach Evans is getting pushed up? Because he was a Devy darling, so to speak? I don't know if that's a derogatory term nowadays to call someone a Devy darling. You see people on social media say that, like, oh, he was a Devy darling. That's what Boutte was also, right? I mean, but now the price is right on him. You're not having to pay that. But Zach Evans, you're going to have to spend, the rookie running back on the Rams, you're going to have to spend a 3rd round pick. Is that someone that you're interested in? Or in that range, is that a little pricey? So is he a taxi squad stash, or is he an active go get him for you?
Yeah, I think Sean Tucker, Zach Evans, Kayshon Boutte, those 3 have been on the radar. They've been on the Devy radar since they were freshmen, and people know the name. And there are people, you listen to other content, there's still people out there going, Zach Evans is a top 6 running back in the class. They've moved the goalposts from top 2 or 3 until, okay, it was a 6th rounder that went to the Rams. We definitely can't say 2 or 3 now. We got to move that down a little bit. But because he's a running back and because he has that, name cachet going for him, that's like 2 of the 3 paths I would look for to want to draft him. So I've taken more Zach Evans than I ever planned on. Like saying I'm taking a 6th round running back in the 3rd round, that usually wasn't on the radar before. That's usually not a good bet. But I think for this season, because it dies off so quickly, I think that strategy is becoming more equitable. So yeah, that definitely Zach Evans is one I've taken more than I thought.
Excuse me. I'm with Scott Connor from Destination Devy. You follow him at Charles Chill FFB. What is that? What's Charles Chill? What is that?
Oh, so Charles is my middle name.
Okay.
And that's what was my nickname from when I was in high school. And everyone said I was the most chill person. So they just said Charles Chill.
I love
and
it.
then FFB, obvious. So
Fantasy
haven't changed it in a decade.
Right. It's like, you see some people with their Twitter handles, you could tell that they're older and they've built a following. So it's, they have to leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
So, what podcasts do you listen to? Do you, as a content creator now, do you have a couple appointment podcasts that you like that you could tell people that they should check out that are not yours, obviously?
Yeah. I mean, I try to, so I'm the podcast guy. I listen to about 30 hours of podcasts a day, 3x speed. I just
3x speed. That's chipmunk level, man.
It is 3x speed. It allows me. And here's the thing. I only probably retain about 10 to 20% of it. But all it takes is I'm listening to a show. It's an hour-long show. If I get 1 or 2 things out of that show that triggers my mind and it keeps a memory for me to go back a couple hours later and look into something, that's beneficial to me. And a lot of times I just enjoy listening to it because we're junkies. We're degenerates in terms of like if you're talking about Dynasty or NFL, I'm interested for the most part all the time. I will say this. What's made me a better content creator is listening to NFL stuff. I try to listen to all the Dynasty shows out there. I probably don't listen to every episode because a lot of the Dynasty content is the same stuff we're talking about all the time every week anyway.
So what do you think? What do you think separates it then? Like, what if everything's the same? What do you think makes a successful, in your eyes? Because everyone's going to see it a little differently. A successful Dynasty or something that might attract you to a podcast.
I think that's where it depends on where you're at in your Dynasty career. Like
Where
if you're
at?
Yeah, for me, it's probably I'm really interested in strategy discussions. Like this kind of show, I'd be interested in finding somebody that came on and they're talking through their process. I don't need them to tell me what to do. I'd rather them tell me what they're doing and why they're doing it. Then I can use my mind to say, okay, that kind of makes sense. That maybe I want to tweak it or try something on my own. Strategy stuff, game theory stuff, like how to kind of because here's the thing. The Dynasty space, I've been doing Dynasty content this is my 6th year doing Dynasty content. But I've also noticed that there is, and you may have noticed this too, the edge in terms of information in a moderately sharp league is gone. I'm not going to go get something done or make a trade or make a move because half the people in my league don't know what's going on. Most people know what's going on. And if they don't, a simple Twitter search or Google search within a minute, they can figure out, okay, why is this player trending or why is everybody trying to sell this player right now? Like it's not that hard to figure out. So I think the edge in more is high level strategy and actually playing your opponents in your league, knowing your league. What are they thinking? How are they thinking? How can I pivot or zig when they're zagging in that specific league? Not across all my leagues because a lot of them are different, but I think playing the psychology of your opponents is better and a bigger edge now than just saying, I know information you don't, and more importantly, I can pick players better than you. With sites like Player Profiler and all the other places that put out actual like player-centric content, I'm not any better at picking players than you. Especially when we were picking in the tiers of 6 receivers that went in round 2 and 3. That's not an edge for me.
Right.
And you're lying if you say it's an edge for you, or you. Even if you are the one creating the website. It's not necessarily an edge for you because there's how many people using that same site against you. So I just don't think the edge is in picking players. I think it's in hierarchy strategy and playing the psychology of your opponents.
I started the Dynasty podcast on RotoWire because I listened to 30 plus hours of podcast a week, and I would, I just feel like sometimes with content creation, I could always tell right away if somebody plays in a lot of leagues or not. And I'm like, trade back from the 102 to the 103. That's not happening, unless you really, or actually maybe this year there's a tier break there. But normally, if you get to pick 7, this year people are saying, trade back. Nobody's doing that. Like you said, information is like paper towels. It's a commodity. Everybody knows. I remember the days where you can go to RotoWire or RotoWorld and you have the edge of information. Now it's like sleeper notification. Oh, okay. 2 minutes later, I got a trade offer trying to buy Alexander Madison because everyone in the world knows that Dalvin Cook now is unlikely to be on the roster. That happens all the time. Scott, a couple other questions before I let you go here because I'm genuinely interested. You're a fascinating guy. I'm glad I heard you for the first time recently, and I'm embarrassed by that I hadn't heard before when you were on Matt Kelly's show. Now your content is appointment for me. I love listening to you and the stuff you do, and I advise anyone that's listening to this podcast. We get a lot of newer Dynasty players or people who have been doing it for 5 years. Follow Scott. I mean, if you want to, it's a totally different type of discussion, and all of your links are in the description below. That's a no-brainer for me. One of my favorite follows. That said, now, what got you from Dynasty player into the content thing? Because for me, like I said, it was like infuriating for me to listen to podcasts. I had questions for podcasters, so I just started inviting them onto my podcast. I asked them these questions. So what was the transition for you to start creating the content?
Yeah, it's interesting. I linked up with Ryan McDowell and Curtis Patrick back in 2017, and they started something called Dynasty Command Center, which is now defunct. It's part of RotoViz now, but it was just a community. It was the first Dynasty community I had been in because I had played for about 4 years. And back, when I started playing back in 2012, 2013, Dynasty was all over. I mean, there were ESPN leagues and Yahoo leagues, and they were poorly run, and there was very little information out there. Like there was some, but it wasn't as concise as it was today. So I joined this community. It was like, 2017. It's like a groundbreaking community because it's like a chat where everybody's in there just talking Dynasty. And I learned so much in a year, and I was so active that they were like, yeah, you want to come on and be like one of our staff writers or our moderators for the community. And it had, 300-400 people in there. And at that point I was like, okay, like I'm able to kind of like take information that I'm reading and listening. And that's when I started getting into listening to podcasts and reading articles and all that kind of stuff. Like, I guess one of my skills is I can take the information and articulate it into something that's actionable for the masses. So I just kind of jumped into it, started my own podcast in 2018, jumped on some podcasts with those guys. And then that's how my content creation started. It have just grown from there. But I will say this, I think that one of the other things that's really cool about content creation is makes you a better just communicator in general in life. I work a career outside of fantasy football that 95% of my job is judged on 5% of how I present information. It's like I can do a great job, but if I go and do a presentation in front of all the higher ups and that's going to be what they're going to know me for, I need to be well spoken. So at the same time, I got into doing Toastmasters. I run a Toastmasters club. Helps you work on public speaking and communication and evaluating others. So I have, I think, a pretty keen eye to listen to somebody and be like, yeah, they know what they're talking about, or they're articulating in a way that other people can absorb it and learn from it. So it's an evolving thing. And I just love jumping on shows and just talking about this because how easy is it to talk about stuff you already love doing? Right? Like it comes naturally. People always go, I'm scared of public speaking. And it's like, yeah, you're scared of public speaking when your boss comes in and tells you have to give a presentation and you have no idea about what the topic is. But when you say, hey, tell me about your family, most people can speak pretty eloquently about that because they know it. It's in their heart. They love it. And I think that's kind of where Dynasty is. And if you have that gift and you love it, like, why not do podcasts? Why not host radio shows or create content? Like, it just seems like if you like doing both, put it together and people get a lot out of it.
And the barrier for entry now, there's no excuse, right? Like everyone
None.
can pay there's a free StreamYard, and there's, it just even from when I started just being into fantasy, Dynasty, the same time you're talking about, like it was work to download a podcast from iTunes onto your thing. Like you had to upload it, download it. Now it's just, so it's definitely more of a flooded marketplace now, but I think that, that's good. I like that there's a lot of choices. It's not that hard to sift through. What was your most nostalgic football memory? Like, what got you, like, when did you know as a kid that you were just like hooked into it? Was it a real game? Was it a video game? Like, what's the nostalgia moment that connected you to football?
All right, so I'm going to go back. I'm a huge Bengals fan. I went to my first Bengals game back in '91, and that was when they played the Cowboys, and that's when the Cowboys were good, and the Bengals were, let's just say, very bad.
This is Boomer Esiason Bengals?
Right after. So I believe it was the start of the '92 season was when the game was, and it was right when Dallas had the triplets, and the Bengals were terrible. They went on to be bad for like a decade straight after that. But that was my first game. That was like the first time I really was like, all right, I'm into pro football. But here's the memory. So it was 2001. I'm at the second to last game of the Bengals season. They're playing the Saints. And the Bengals are 1-13. And in the stadium, there's paper bags over heads and everything. But they were pretty sure they were going to get the number 1 pick in the draft. And it was Carson Palmer. And I remember being at the game, and it was, of course, it's half full, and the Saints were in the playoff, Ricks. Aaron Brooks was their quarterback, if you remember Aaron Brooks. But the Saints were like a 500 team. They were in the hunt for the playoffs that year. And I'll never forget being at the game. This was my first like live game as like an adult where I could actually see it. The first one I went to, I was 7, 8 years old, so I don't really remember it that much. But I'm at the game. I'm sitting in front with my dad behind these Saints fans, and they're, I have my Bengals jersey on, and they're going like, yeah, the whole time they're just barking how the Bengals are horrible, the worst franchise in the league. And I mean, they weren't wrong. Going, you're going to ruin Carson Palmer. You're going to ruin his career. He's never going to get off the ground. And I'll never forget, my dad and I are sitting there, and my dad just is not a confrontational person or anything like that. But these people just won't shut up, right? And the Bengals actually end up winning the game, which was hilarious because the Saints were good and they sucked, but they actually won their second game that season. But I'll never forget, my dad turns around after this guy's heckling us for like a half hour. He's like, dude, you have a Heath Schuler jersey on, and you're sitting here talking about heckling a team about to draft a quarterback early. And at the time, I'm going like, what is he talking about? But if you remember, Heath Schuler was a huge bust for the Saints. And the guy sitting there.
All-time bust.
Yes, yeah, like really high draft pick, absolute bust, was a great quarterback at Tennessee. But they're sitting here heckling us with the Heath Schuler jersey on while their team is losing to the 1-13 Bengals. So that's my first memory of like, all right.
I love football.
That's where I got the feeling in my heart as a fan. Like, and that's where like the fandom came in. And once the fandom's there, then you're looking for other avenues to play fantasy football, gambling, all that kind of stuff. But that's where it started.
Your dad experienced a real life Twitter troll in an analog form,
yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Scott, I kept you longer than I said I would, but I have one more question for you. All right. And I'm going to put you on the spot because you had no idea this question was coming. So, and if there's no answer, you want to think about it, you could brush it aside. It's fine. But if you were the commissioner of the NFL and could change one rule in the NFL to make it better, and again, no one may agree, they may not agree, but what's a rule change? If it's small, big, doesn't matter, overtime rule, just a tiny tweak, something that you would change to make the NFL better or just different.
Man, it's funny because Matt and I, when we were on the show, we talked about this for like 20 minutes because it was right after the Super Bowl and talked about, the pass interference and defensive holding. Can we make that reviewable? Would that destroy the game? Man.
You while you're thinking about it, you want me to? I'll give you one that I've thought because I prepped.
Yeah,
so
I have a vague idea, but yeah, give me yours.
Okay, so you know how like when you're on your 4-yard line and you get a holding penalty, and what's the penalty for that, Scott?
You're going back 10.
No, you're on your own 4-yard line.
Oh yeah, you're only going back 2 yards.
Right, half the distance. Horrible rule. What they should do is take the first down marker and move it away 10 yards. So you're still, you like that? I mean, why is it only a 2-yard penalty? It's a 10-yard penalty. The first down marker should be 10 yards further down the field when you're inside the 5 or inside the 10, whatever it is.
I love that.
You're in on this. You're in.
It's funny thinking about stuff like that. I always am the one that are sitting in the game going, I can't remember what game it was this year, but a team kept taking a penalty on purpose and the other team kept declining it. And I go, well, what happens if they just literally never stop? What happens if the defense just literally goes and lines up offsides on every single game-winning extra point? What happens? At some point, somebody's going to have to the refs are going to have to step in and go, we're going to override the official NFL rules to get this game over. And I think there's a lot of circumstances like that where, sure, is it bad sportsmanship? Yeah, but the scenario isn't accounted for, and somebody would have to go in and just change the rules on the fly. So I think giving my answer was going to be more towards reviewing penalties.
I like that too. There's a conversation to be had there, good and bad.
But the problem is, if you make every penalty reviewable, you are starting to get into things where it's going to draw the viewer into like, we're reviewing this holding call, and you're trying to see if you get a good angle of it. Like that, to me, I want some of the human element into it, but I also believe, like Mike Florio talks about this all the time, and he doesn't understand why the NFL doesn't do it. They start to do it. They started to do it last year, but he goes, why don't we have an eighth official with whistle power? Not just an eighth official in the booth, but an eighth official with whistle power. However that is translated, whether there's somebody on the field that's blowing it on their behalf or whatever, an eighth official with whistle power looking at all the angles that they're looking for when they're reviewing the plays. And that's the official's job. Maybe it's two officials, but the official isn't on the field, which means they're not distracted by the weather conditions, the players, the crowd, or anything. They are literally just looking at all the angles of stuff that you're supposed to be catching on the field that replay takes. And it's just like, why can't we do that? Because there's a lot of times where penalties happen in real time. You can't see it. But if you're watching the game, you're going like, yeah, that was defensive holding. The dude pushed off, or that was pass interference, and then they can't review those type of things. And it's maddening when something like that changes a game.
Yeah, and the whistle power key is the key part of that.
Yes.
I love that one. So I think, it would have to be an odd number. It can't be 2 because if they disagree, it'd have to be 1 or 3, right? It'd have to be like, so there's the veto power there. The other one is, just quickly, and then we'll wrap up here, is if a regular season game ends in a tie, both teams get a loss. There's no ties anymore. So you're incentivized to win, not tie.
I love that. I mean, as a Bengals fan, the stuff with the Bills game last year and the coin flips and all that stuff, like, to me, if my team ties, it's a loss.
It's a loss.
It's a loss because like you're not going to be able to make it up by playing. You're not going to get an extra game to make it up. Effectively, you're still going to have to win every game you would have had to win anyway to finish ahead of the standings or wherever you were going to end up being. So yeah, I like that. That ties are horrible in the NFL. There's no reason for them.
Scott, I appreciate you doing this, man. This was very enjoyable for me because, like I said, I've been listening to you for a short while, but very intensely, and I advise everyone to go follow Scott at Charles Chill FFB. Can everyone find your work? They should be following you if they're watching this. And again, all our video viewers, we appreciate you guys. But if you're listening on the audio podcast, which is where we get the most of our people consuming this content, I want you all to go follow Scott. Where can they find you other than Twitter?
So my 2 podcasts a week are on Destination Devy. So check out Destination Devy Radio, live stream every Tuesday night on Trades in 5, 8:30 on YouTube. It's literally just dynasty trades and dynasty strategy for sometimes 2.5 hours. Until we get done with the questions, we usually go. But those 2 places, I still write occasionally for DLF, and then some other stuff in the wings. I do want to shout out anybody that plays high stakes, FFPC or NFFC or anywhere where you play high stakes. I will be in Vegas. This will be my 5th straight year going to Vegas. So if you're out in Vegas,
when is that?
Week opening weekend of the season, when all the Vegas drafts are out there. So if anybody's out there, they want to catch up, they want to do a podcast or anything like that, let me know, because that's a nice place to gather. I won't be making it to the Fantasy Football Expo this year probably, but Vegas, if anybody's in that space, let me know.
All right, Scott, you've been generous with your time. Everybody, if you have any questions about any of the Taxi Squad stashes that we've talked about today, you can DM Scott, ask him on Twitter, DM me, ask me about it. Until then, good luck in those rookie drafts. Let us know how you do.